I read Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell. This is a reread of this book for me, and it's the second book that he published in his career, and it's directly connected to all of his books are like in one universe. So it's directly connected to the previous book, Ghost Written, although maybe directly connected is too strong of a description. Anyway, the book is about a young man named Eiji Miyake he lives in Japan. He's trying to find his father who left his mother before he grew up, so when he was like a little baby, and he leaves his island home and comes to the big city of Tokyo in order to accomplish that goal. The book is broken into 9 parts, although only 8 of them have written material. We'll talk about the symbolism of the 9th blank section. The previous book also had 9 sections, and there's kind of completeness to the number 9. It's a very traditional number. It makes me think of Norse mythology, where the number 9 is a magical number, a number that is used in rituals for like 3 sets of 3, stuff like that. It just feels like a very full number. I'm not sure how it relates to Japanese culture. I don't know about that, but I'm not sure that that's the point of choosing that in this case, because Number 9 Dream, of course, is a reference to a John Lennon song who also appears in the book. Also, right there in the name, you have the idea of dreams. Dreams are a huge theme in the book, and in a way, you could think of each of the 8 parts as a different kind of dream and a different exploration of the meaning of the word dream and, how that relates to how we live our lives as people, how we set goals for ourselves, how we reflect on our past, how we think about the future, and all of that kind of stuff. It all relates to dreams. So to start off the book, E.G. is in a cafe outside of a place called Panopticon, and that's the name of the chapter as well. And right there, Panopticon is a reference to a kind of dream of a utopia that comes out of the philosophy of Jeremy Bentham, an idea that we could have some kind of perfect surveillance over people that would cause them to behave in the best way possible, to like obey the rules because they fear surveillance and reprisal for breaking the rules. And I think Panopticon is really about fantasy and like daydreams, having fantasies, that kind of a dream. The reason for that, like look at all the things that happen, especially like right off the bat, AG is having some kind of like weird James Bond style fantasy. It's not weird, but it's kind of funny. It's an interesting way to start off the book because we don't know what's real and what's not. Is he really a James Bond type character with these kind of smooth capabilities of infiltration and assassination and things like that? Spoilers, no, he is not. And this also reminds me of the previous book with the way that one starts, where the character Quasar is like very self-deluded and thinks that he has capabilities that he doesn't. But he's actually like living in a fantasy or a dream. He's making real life choices based on those delusions, while AG is just kind of sitting here not doing anything, but imagining what it would be like to be potent enough and assertive enough to accomplish the goals that he's set for himself. So we get to see this incredible fantasy of him infiltrating Panopticon, finding out information about his father, but come to find out that it's not really happening in terms of like what's diegetically true in the narrative. But again, there's another like meta layer that is happening there that I think is really crunchy and interesting, where we're being presented with something like AG is not exactly an unreliable narrator, But Mitchell is playing with the reality of the narrative, so to speak. We all know that we're reading fiction when we're reading this book, but we're looking for what is quote unquote true and what is a fiction within the world of the universe. But of course, all of it is fiction. And I think there's a way of reading this book where you see in the ending, AG escapes from the fictional world itself almost. And we talked about in the previous book, Ghost Written, at the near the end of the book, there's an idea introduced that the reason that people's lives play out the way that they do and the kind of cause and effect chain of relationships that happen and all of that pushing and pulling of our lives is down to the fact that we are all inside of some kind of story, which of course is true since those are all characters in a novel in this case, and that the story is somehow controlling or driving the lives of these people. The story is an organism that's larger than them, that encompasses them, and of which they are merely kind of like fingers to be manipulated on the body or something like that. But in this case, I think AGA kind of manages to escape from the story, but we'll talk about that more near the end, or I guess that's a way to look at it, or a way that I've thought of the story before. Anyway, to get back to Panopticon, there's really not much that actually, like, quote unquote, happens in this part of the book. It's just introducing us to AG's goals, the way that his mind works, the space of the Cafe Jupiter where he's hanging out across the street from Panopticon, and the different people who are kind of in his life because of that, that he's also having, like, you know, an attraction to the waitress. He's watching this weird old man who plays video games in the cafe and stuff like that. So in the next chapter, or the next part, we have Lost Property is the name of it. And this part is like broken up into different sections, but it's kind of like the dream of memory. Like maybe you'll fall asleep and have a dream and you'll vividly remember something, or you could even be caught up in a kind of daydream where you vividly remember something that happened in your past, to the point where, you know, like if it was something traumatic where you got hurt or something like that, the part of your body that was hurt gets hurt again or whatever. It's just an all-encompassing dream that takes over not just your mind, but your body. That's kind of what this part makes me think of, because we find out AG's backstory, that actually he was one of a pair of twins and that his twin sister died. The idea of a twin sister is really interesting because it's kind of like another part of AG which he lost. And then after losing her, it seems to be part of the reason why he left the islands in the first place, due to his grief. And this was kind of a way to run away from all of that. And it also makes him wonder about the meaning of life, which is a really important theme in the book as well. And how meaning is tied to a type of dreaming, right? Because we talk about dreams in terms of goals. Like, I have a dream to be whatever, the mayor or a writer or an astronaut, whatever it is. We call those things dreams when we kind of mean goals. And those goals can set a meaning for our life because it's something that we chose for ourselves, and that we chose it in order for it to serve some purpose or function within the context of society. So it has a meaning to other people as well as to us, right? Well, what's the meaning of a young girl drowning to death out in the sea? There's no meaning there for AG. He can't see the point of it, and it makes him doubt that life actually does have a meaning. The other important thing that happens here, AG gets a job, but he kind of immediately loses the job. He just kind of like, Tokyo just seems like a crazy place in this book where surreal things are happening all the time. His boss is paranoid and accuses him of trying to steal his job and stuff. And ends up killing himself. And also, like, AG receives a letter from his mother that tells him about his early childhood when he was a baby. He never met his father, and he doesn't really know his mother either. And this letter kind of gives him an explanation as to why that was. And it turns out that his mother was just not in a emotional place that she felt was safe enough to care for her children. So she gave the children to her mother back in her home village because she had the impulse to throw AG off of a building, and luckily it didn't happen, but it scared her so badly that she felt like she didn't deserve to be a mother. And that little part is kind of interesting because it's like a dream again that took over his mother, this fantasy of throwing her baby off of a building. And who knows, exactly what it meant to her, because in the letter, it's strongly conveyed the shame that she feels around this. And, did she feel like freedom? Was it a fantasy about not being tied down by a baby, or who knows what? But in any case, the fantasy scares her so badly that she refuses to take responsibility for the children because she can't trust herself. In the third part, it's called Video Games, and this is another kind of fantasy, but it's a more practical kind of dreaming where you can play out your fantasies in a very material way. E.G. goes to a video arcade. He plays some games. He meets up with a guy named Diamond, and they have like a whole crazy night that feels very dreamlike and surreal, where they pick up a couple of young women and go to a love hotel and end up sleeping with the women. And the next day, AG wakes up to find out that he's been abandoned by all of the people that he partied with during the night, and that he's been stuck with the bill, and he has to escape from that situation. In the midst of all of that, one of the characters that he met in the whole thing was a young woman who was fighting with Diamond, and there's a weird energy between those characters. And this young lady, Miriam, tells AG that she knows his father, and because of that, he ends up tracking her down later and asking her, like, who is my father? What did you mean by that? But come to find out that she just thought that his father was Diamond's father because that's what Diamond put in the hotel logbook. So it was a misunderstanding. In 4, we get a whole new spin about the idea of dreams, that there's a kind of nightmare quality to dreams sometimes, right? Like they can be really horrible and terrifying. And in this chapter, AG is kidnapped by the Yakuza, the mafia in Japan. And a part of the reason is because of that whole thing of Diamond saying that AG is his brother and him reaching out and contacting Miriam. Those two characters are associated with the Yakuza, and they pull AG into their orbit accidentally. And there's a whole like civil war happening with the Yakuza, and AG has to like participate in all kinds of heinous, crazy things. But in the end, he gets out of it because of the two sides fighting each other to the point where they kind of destroy each other. Not completely, but enough to where, a nobody like him is able to basically to get away. An interesting connection to the previous book in this part is that Subatar, the Mongolian KGB hitman guy, reappears as a supporting character once again. And so he seems to be on one side of the mafia, but then turns on them. And he's the reason why AG is able to escape, which is kind of surprising because Subatar is such a psychopath. in Ghost Written that he would just kill somebody for the fun of it and never let them go. Although he does kind of justify things according to his own personal philosophy. But I'm not saying it's out of character. It was just surprising when I read it for the first time, I remember. In part 5, because of this, AG hides out because he's worried that the mafia is going to track him down and kill him since he was a witness to everything. At the same time, though, when he tries to like check on, that lots of people died, like dozens of people died in the crazy violence that happened. And there was all kinds of like, like weirdness that should be hard to cover up. And there's not a trace of it in the news. There's no whisper of it anywhere in rumors or anything like that. And so it just seems like the crazy events of the night just like evaporate into the culture of Tokyo in the exact same way that like a nightmare would. Even though you have the terrible feeling of being scared, the actual physical danger of the entire thing, or like any kind of evidence of whatever you were having the nightmare about, is gone. But of course, these things did happen. The absence of evidence in this case is down to the kind of extreme corruption that seems to be at the bedrock of Tokyo's culture in the book. And so everybody's kind of tied up with the mafia in ways that the police are not doing anything about it. The reporters are not reporting on it. And everybody's just kind of pretending like these things don't happen. So in part 5, it's called The Study of Tales. And in this part, we get yet another type of dream in which it's kind of the dreaming of reading stories. Because AG is staying at a house of his landlord sends him to a place to help hide him. And while he's there, he like goes up into the attic and there's a book of unpublished amateur stories that are kind of like these anthropomorphic characters like Winnie the Pooh or something like that, except that they live in weird post-apocalyptic war-torn society. And it seems like they're tales that are written for a child, for a younger version of his landlord, in fact. But they meditate on war and death and the meaning of life. And it might seem like this story doesn't have a whole lot to do with AG's story. But in fact, I think it's actually like pretty closely related, because there's this whole thing about this character named Goat Rider, which is a cute play on words for the previous book, Ghost Written. And Goat Rider he has a dream of writing a story, or having the idea of a story that no one else has ever had, and writing it down. And when he's doing that, he is like thinking up a story that no one's ever thought up before. And he's so excited by it, and he's so pleased to have written the story out. And then after he writes the story, he finds that the story has been stolen or it's gone. But in fact, he comes to find out that as he's been writing the pages, he's also been eating them, because goats will eat anything. And even in the previous book, Ghost Written, one of the most important books in the history of the world, maybe, was fed to a goat that had the secret formulas for the way to invent artificial consciousness, which is a kind of tangential connection between the two books. But his entire reason for being Goat Rider is being destroyed by him as he's creating it. Like, there's simultaneous destruction and creation happening that undermines the claim that this is his greatest desire or his dream. There's an idea in the book that's articulated several times that in achieving your dream, the rules of reality will change around you in such a way that you didn't actually achieve your dream, and instead your dream was always something else, or the rules of uh, getting the achievement of the dream have changed such that you didn't achieve anything. And this is, illustrated with Goat Rider. And it's directly related to E.G.'s story because he is going to accomplish everything that he set out to do at the beginning of the story, but it's not going to be a satisfying conclusion for him. He's going to be very unhappy with how that whole thing turns out. And what he actually ends up desiring or having new dreams of is something completely different. And the same can be said in the Goat Rider story. AG also ends up being contacted by his grandfather at this point in the story, and that kind of like pulls him into the next section of the book, part 6, called Kaiten. He meets with his grandfather, who gives him a journal, although he doesn't know it's his grandfather at the time. He gives him a journal of a World War II fighter in the Japanese army who's part of their family. And again, this is the kind of dream where you're sucked into a narrative. In the previous chapter, it was a fictional narrative, and in this one, it's diary or a journal narrative. But of course, again, there's that meta layer that everything is a fiction and everything is driving the story. Everything feeds into the story, but that story is the fundamental reality of AG's life. So anyway, what's the difference between fiction and reality? There is no real difference. It's all fiction, but it's all reality. And that is to say that, that both of them are also a kind of dreaming. In the narrative, the soldier is a very young man who has been recruited to do these kind of submarine kamikaze style piloting of a torpedo into American warships, and what he thinks about that. And this really like gets into the whole idea of having a purpose in your life, and what your life means has to do with like the decision that you make, the commitment that you have to it. He's very highly invested in the propaganda of the Japanese state during World War II, and like believes that Americans are like animals, and that everything that they can do to stop the Americans is completely justified, including destroying himself. And that by destroying himself, he will bring glory to his family. He'll bring glory to his name. He'll be invested in the elevated ancestors in his afterlife because of these brave actions of killing himself as a human torpedo. And ultimately, his entire, like, he does drive a torpedo into something, but it doesn't explode. The warhead fails to trigger the dynamite in the warhead. And so all he ends up doing is injuring himself and fails. And so once again, you have like meeting of the goal, and then it is undermined, or the rules kind of change at the last second. AG finds out that through his kind of stepmother, I guess is what I would call her, the woman that his father is married to. I mean, they don't have a relationship, so she's not any kind of mother, but I don't know how else to describe that. She comes and meets him and tells him to like go away, and that the grandfather is dead. And she reveals the man that he met who gave him the journal actually was his grandfather. And AG kind of decides that he doesn't want to meet his father now that he like knows more about the family, and that the family seems to hate him so much without even having met him. And at this point, AG just has to kind of survive, and he ends up getting a job as a cook in a pizza kitchen. In part 7, the part is called Cards. And in this part, he gets a package that was addressed to somebody that has the same name as him, but it's not him. So it's kind of an accident of fate. And in this package, there's a story about a woman and her interaction with the Yakuza and how terrible it was and how she has no recourse to justice. And it's an appeal to the AG who was supposed to get this to find some way to find justice for what happened to her. AG has a friend who is a hacker, and he tries to hack into the Pentagon. Is like this whole thing that he has a goal to hack into the Pentagon to prove what a great hacker he is. And he gets caught doing this hacking thing, but he is so good that the Pentagon forces, probably like the CIA or some shadowy arm of the US government, recruits him into cybersecurity and actually seems to recruit him into the program that ends up creating Zookeeper from the previous book, Ghost Written. And he goes to Saratoga, Texas, which is where that whole thing was based in, and that it's a super secret thing that he can't talk about. But before he leaves, he ends up giving EG a virus that is going to be like an email chain virus that will be important to the plot. When EG checks his answering machine in this chapter, he finds out that he has a message from his father, and he goes, the father is like, "Oh, come to this place at this time, and I want to talk to you. I didn't know, my wife lied to me. I didn't know what was going on, and I love you and I want to meet you," and all this stuff. And it ends up just being a trick to pull him back into the possession of the Yakuza. And the Yakuza boss has them play this weird card game that, has to do with just complete chance of who's going to live and who's going to die. It's a cruel game. But it ends up that the Yakuza boss has a stroke and dies during this whole thing. And so he's the one who ends up losing the game in a sense, but also, again, he achieved his goal of getting these people together, and he was going to kill them in a maniacal way. And then the rules of the game change, the rules of the dream change at the last second and take away his victory from him. And so it's just a repetition of this theme of achievement being undermined by failure. So EG is allowed to get out of there, and he goes back to work, and he has to deliver some pizza, and the guy that he delivers the pizza to, just by dint of coincidence, in the Panopticon building that he was looking at the beginning of the story and imagining infiltrating in order to get information on his father. Well, he has this pizza delivery job, so he successfully infiltrates the building, and lo and behold, the guy that he takes the pizza to is his father. He realizes, but his father doesn't seem to know that it's him. And just from the things that he sees about the man and how selfish and bad he is, he decides not to reveal himself to his father. In other words, he achieves his goal, but the rules change in that moment, and he decides to go another way. In the 8th part, the final part, it's called The Language of Mountain is Rain. And EG goes to meet his mother, and they kind of come to a reckoning. He has various dreams while he's on his way there. He meets a lady who trades him some fruit for his dreams, and she claims to be able to somehow consume his dreams for energy, and that she has been living for hundreds of years off the energy of dreams, which is a really surreal encounter, but is something, like another psychic phenomenon, kind of like what we saw in the pages of Ghost Written, the kind of thing that might be possible in Mitchell's universe, but also speaks to an idea of vitality in dreams, and that the way that dreams interact, with us as people. We are made of material things. We're biological living creatures, but dreams are ephemeral. They seem to be spiritual. They're internal. They're phenomenological, and they drive us in primary ways. They're like the deep goals that we hold. And then once we achieve them, they just, in an ephemeral way, just evaporate, and a brand new dream blooms in us and drives us in yet another direction. And so they do seem to have energy and power. And the idea that someone could kind of pluck a dream out of us and consume its energy for their own longevity and vitality makes a certain kind of sense. It's an interesting little side piece in there, and just adds to the uncanny nature, I think, of Mitchell's universe. It also, again, kind of points to the idea of the power that the dreams have within the narrative, but that also AG is kind of trapped in the narrative, and maybe that riding a dream would be a way to get out. It's one of those things that makes me think that AG is able to get out of being inside of a story in a certain kind of way. He ends up going back to his home island, and there's a kind of circularity to the entire story in that way, at least from AG's perspective, even though we started with him in Panopticon, are trying to go into Panopticon in his fantasies. He's already been there in reality and achieved that. And so now he's going back home. And so, like in the first book in Ghost Written, there's a circularity literally around, going around the entire globe, and also ending where we started the story with Quasar. He hears about an earthquake that happens in Tokyo, now that he's not there. And there's all these friends and a woman that he's fallen in love with in Tokyo. And he's desperate for the idea of the earthquake to not be real. And he even thinks the same thing that he thought on the day that his sister died, that he blamed himself for. He asked the god of thunder to make him the greatest soccer player on the field that day, and that he would give anything for that to be true. And he kind of felt the god respond to him inside of his spirit and ask anything, really, anything at all. And he was like, absolutely anything. And then he was the greatest player on the soccer field that day, and they did win. And he was, celebrated for being a key part of that victory. And it seemed like the price was his sister's life. And once again, at this part, he's kind of praying in an abstract way that he would give anything. He would give anything for this earthquake to just be a dream, for it to not be true. He would give anything. Who is he making that appeal to? It's not clear. Maybe to us as members of the audience. I mean, when I read it, I also don't want it to be true. I don't want all of those people that he cares about and that I care about now through his story for them to be hurt or killed or in danger. I want him to go back. I want him to have more, deeper relationships with all of those people, for his life to continue and evolve and enrich the lives of his lover and his friends and all of that kind of stuff. I want the story to go on, basically, just like AG wants his life to go on. So he makes this extreme wish, and it's not I'm not sure who is hearing the wish, in terms of like before the God of Thunder heard the wish. Who is this wish to? Where does it go? Well, in the 9th chapter, it's just empty pages. There's nothing there, and which is a kind of invitation for us to come up with, well, does he go back? Does he not go back? Does the structure of the story continue where he achieves his goal, but it somehow undermines him with failure? That's kind of what I think, because each time that he did achieve his goal, it was undermined with a sort of failure. And in this case, the idea that there was an earthquake in Tokyo and that maybe it killed the people he loved, that is a dream because it's part of the novel. And the novel is not true in the sense of like a material reality that you and I share in this universe. This is a work of fiction. It's a lie in some sense. And so AG's wish is granted in that the earthquake is just part of a story. But in being granted that, hey, yeah, the earthquake is just part of a story, it didn't really happen to all those people, the story evaporates, it stops happening. It's undermined by failure once again, and AG is taken out of the universe that he inhabits. He kind of escapes being within the story, and he no longer exists, and his perspective is the primary perspective. It's written in the first person, it's written in the I, and therefore there's no one to tell us the story anymore. And so the pages just go blank. There's no more voice. This is a very like subversive way, an interesting way to end the book, but also to contemplate like the meaning of life and of dreams. What's the meaning of E.G.'s entire story if he just ceases to exist from the universe? There's precedent for this inside of the story. There's this whole movie that gets watched early on in the book called The Vorman Problem, where this man is institutionalized and he's being interviewed by a psychologist, and the man claims to be God, and the psychologist, of course, you're not God, that's not true. And the patient says, well, I'll make Belgium cease to exist, and then we'll see how you feel about it, which is what happens. The psychologist is the only one who remembers that Belgium was even a thing. Everyone thinks that he's a little bit weird for believing that Belgium ever existed. And then the God turns the tables on him and makes him the patient in the nut house and himself the doctor. And so completely reverses the positions of, who's in and who's out. And even in the Goat Rider story, God makes an appearance and claims, to be like limited by all kinds of rules, and he can only do this or that, but every once in a while he'll bail someone out. There's the Thunder God who grants the wishes of AG. And so there's this idea of like a force out there that has a meta power that is beyond the diegetic reality of the universe and can pull off miracles. And so maybe the final miracle is the revealing to AG that, the entire thing is a story and he's just a fictional character. And then he would kind of just cease to exist the same way that a dream does when we wake up from it, just in a more real and almost brutal fashion. So again, like Mitchell's work is so fascinating and interesting. His structure is so different. The idea that I talked about in Ghost Written with polyphony, I think, is here. It's just that in this particular book, we only have the perspective of one character in AG, but we see that even inside of one person are many, many voices, many different dreams and ways of being are expressed. And so, like, there's a polyphony inside of him, and there are many different kinds of people who inhabit Tokyo, and none of their ways of being are necessarily ratified above any others. They all have their place in the life of Tokyo. And so it's just another fascinating story. So glad to keep reading Mitchell's work, and I'll be moving on to Cloud Atlas next time.